The cabin lights glowed soft and golden, reflecting off polished surfaces and crystal glasses as the quiet hum of luxury filled the first-class section. Everything about the space whispered exclusivity: tailored suits, designer handbags, low voices, and the subtle clink of expensive drinks being served with practiced smiles. It was the kind of environment where people measured each other without speaking, where status was understood before names were ever exchanged. He sat in seat 2, calm, still, composed, dressed simply in dark jeans, a fitted black shirt, and a jacket that didn't scream wealth but carried a quiet confidence. His posture was straight, his eyes observant, taking in everything without appearing to care. A leather bag rested neatly under the seat in front of him, and his hands were folded loosely in his lap. No one greeted him, but several people noticed him. A man across the aisle glanced over, frowned slightly, then leaned toward his wife and whispered something behind his hand. She followed his gaze, her expression tightening for just a second before she looked away. A younger guy in a tailored suit smirked, pulling out his phone as if already entertained by something that hadn't even happened yet. Then the flight attendant noticed him. Her smile had been perfect just seconds before, bright, effortless, welcoming. But the moment her eyes landed on him, something shifted. It was subtle, almost invisible unless you were paying attention, but he noticed. She approached slowly, heels clicking softly against the floor, her expression carefully neutral but no longer warm. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice polite but firm. "May I see your boarding pass?" He looked up at her, calm and steady, then reached into his pocket without a word. He handed it over. She glanced at it, paused, looked at him again, then back at the boarding pass. Something didn't add up in her mind. "This seat is in first class," she said, her tone tightening just slightly. "I know," he replied calmly. A couple of passengers nearby leaned in just enough to listen without being obvious. The businessman across the aisle had already unlocked his phone, pretending to scroll while clearly recording. The flight attendant forced a thin smile. "There may have been a mistake. Can you come with me for a moment?" He didn't move immediately. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Her smile disappeared completely now. "Sir, I just need to verify something." A pause. The tension in the air thickened. "I'd prefer to stay seated," he said quietly. "The boarding pass is valid." Now the whispers started. "Here we go." I knew something was off. This is why they need stricter checks. The man in 3C chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. The flight attendant's voice hardened. "Sir, I'm asking you to come with me." "And I'm telling you," he replied, his tone still calm but now edged with steel. "There's no issue." That was the moment it escalated. She straightened, no longer pretending. "If you don't comply, I will have to call security." Gasps. Subtle, but there. Someone muttered, "Wow." The phone across the aisle was now fully pointed at him. He slowly exhaled, then unbuckled his seatbelt. "All right," he said, standing up smoothly. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't defend himself, and somehow that made it even more uncomfortable. As he stepped into the aisle, every eye followed him. Some with curiosity, some with judgment, some with quiet satisfaction, as if something expected was finally happening. The flight attendant gestured toward the front of the plane. "This way." He walked past the rows, his expression unreadable, his movements controlled. The silence behind him wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, filled with unspoken assumptions and quiet conclusions already drawn. At the front of the cabin near the galley, she turned to him. "There's been a discrepancy," she said. "First-class seating is assigned very carefully, and you don't think I belong there," he finished calmly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." A flicker of discomfort crossed her face, but it disappeared quickly. "Just wait here," she said, stepping away. He stood alone for a moment, the faint hum of the aircraft surrounding him. From where he stood, he could see the cockpit door, closed, quiet, unremarkable. A second flight attendant approached, whispering something to the first. They both glanced at him, then back at each other. Their expressions carried that same quiet certainty, the kind that didn't need proof. Minutes passed. Back in first class, the murmurs grew louder, probably trying to sneak in. People always pushing boundaries. "I hope they remove him before takeoff." The man recording zoomed in slightly, capturing every second. Then, a chime echoed through the cabin. The pilot announcement system. A soft crackle. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard." The voice paused. The entire cabin fell silent. The flight attendant near the front froze. "This is your captain speaking." A beat, then footsteps, calm, measured, familiar. He stepped forward. The same man, the one they had just removed, now standing at the front of the plane and speaking into the intercom. My name is Captain Marcus Hawley. The silence shattered. You could feel it, like something invisible had just broken. The businessman's phone lowered slowly, his mouth slightly open. The woman beside him blinked rapidly, her expression shifting from certainty to confusion to something much closer to embarrassment. The flight attendant's face drained of color. Captain Hawley continued, his voice steady, professional, but carrying a weight that every single person on that plane could now feel. I'll be flying you safely to your destination today. A pause. I appreciate your patience during a brief misunderstanding before departure. No anger, no accusation, just calm, controlled power. He hung up the intercom and turned. For a moment, his eyes met the flight attendant's. She couldn't hold his gaze. No one could. Without another word, he walked past her, toward the cockpit. Each step felt heavier now, not because of him but because of everything that had just been exposed. The door opened. He stepped inside, and it closed behind him. The cabin remained frozen. Then slowly, very slowly, people began to move again. But nothing felt the same. The man who had been recording quickly locked his phone, his earlier confidence completely gone. The couple across the aisle avoided looking at each other entirely. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable silence that pressed down on everyone. A few minutes later, the same flight attendant returned to first class. But she wasn't the same. Her posture had changed. Her confidence had cracked. She approached seat to a empty nest. She stood there for a moment, staring at it, as if trying to process what had just happened. Then she turned to the passengers. If anyone needs anything, she started, her voice quieter than before. No one responded, because now everyone understood something they hadn't before. The man they had judged, the man they had whispered about, the man they had watched being removed, was the one in complete control, high above the ground, carrying their lives in his hands. The plane began to move, taxiing slowly. The engines roared to life, and as it lifted into the sky, the weight of what had happened didn't disappear. It stayed, sitting with them, unavoidable, uncomfortable, real. Mid-flight, turbulence hit. Sudden, violent. The plane shook, causing gasps and tight grips on armrests. Drinks spilled. The calm luxury of first class shattered into fear and uncertainty. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. His voice came through again, calm, steady, unshaken. We're experiencing some turbulence, but everything is under control. And just like that, the fear eased, because now they knew who was in control. Not the version of him they had imagined, but the reality they had been forced to face. The same man they doubted was the one keeping them safe. Minutes later, the turbulence passed, the cabin steadied, and a strange kind of silence followed. Not awkward, not tense, different, respectful. When the plane finally landed, no one rushed to stand up. No one pushed forward. They sat, waiting, processing. The door opened. Passengers began to exit slowly. And as they passed the cockpit, something unexpected happened. One by one, they glanced inside. Some nodded. Some whispered quiet apologies he couldn't even hear. Some couldn't bring themselves to look at him at all. But every single one of them understood. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a reflection. And it had been exposed at 30,000 feet. The man who had recorded everything. He paused at the cockpit door. His hand tightened around his phone. Then slowly he deleted the video. Because some moments weren't meant to be shared. They were meant to be learned from. And as Captain Marcus Hollis stepped out of the cockpit, composed as ever, the power dynamic had completely shifted. Not because he demanded it, but because he never needed to. Respect, once denied, had finally been earned in silence. And no one on that flight would ever forget the moment they got it wrong. The terminal buzzed with movement as passengers stepped off the aircraft, blending back into the rhythm of the world they came from, but something about them had changed. It wasn't visible at first glance. No one was openly talking about it. No loud conversations. No dramatic confrontations. But the energy was different, quieter, heavier, more reflective. Captain Marcus Hawley stepped out of the cockpit with the same calm presence he had carried from the beginning. His uniform was now uncrisp, perfectly fitted, every line sharp and intentional. The gold stripes on his sleeves caught the light as he adjusted his cuffs, his face composed, unreadable. He didn't look at the passengers. He didn't need to. They were already looking at him. The same people who had whispered before now stood awkwardly near the exit, suddenly unsure of where to place their eyes. A businessman who had once smirked now stepped aside quickly, almost instinctively, creating space as Marcus walked past. No words were exchanged, but the shift was undeniable. Near the gate, the flight attendant stood waiting, Her posture was rigid, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The confidence she had earlier was gone, replaced by something far more human: nervousness and regret. "Captain," she began softly as he approached. He stopped. For a brief moment, the noise of the terminal seemed to fade. I want to apologize," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "What happened earlier shouldn't have happened." Marcus looked at her, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just a steady, quiet gaze that made her words feel even smaller. "For what exactly?" he asked calmly. She hesitated. The question wasn't aggressive, but it forced honesty. "For assuming," she admitted, "for not treating you with the respect you deserved." A pause. People nearby slowed down, sensing something important without fully understanding it. Marcus nodded slightly, as if acknowledging her words. Then he said something that she and everyone within earshot would remember for a long time. "Respect isn't something you give after you realize who someone is," he said quietly. "It's something you show before you know." The words landed heavier than any accusation could have. Her eyes dropped. "I understand," she whispered. He held her gaze for just a second longer, then gave a small nod and stepped past her, continuing down the terminal without another word. No lecture, no scene, just truth. Behind him, the passengers who had witnessed everything stood in silence again. But this time, it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of ignorance, it was the silence of realization. The businessman who had recorded earlier lingered near a window, staring down at his phone. The video was gone, but the memory wasn't. He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck, as if trying to shake off something that wouldn't leave. A young boy, no older than 10, tugged at his mother's sleeve nearby. "Mom," he said quietly, "that was the pilot, right?" She nodded. Why were they being mean to him? She opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out, because there wasn't a simple answer. And maybe that was the point. Outside, planes moved across the runway, lifting into the sky one after another, each carrying people with their own stories, their own judgments, their own blind spots. Marcus walked through it all with the same steady pace, his figure blending into the flow of the airport but never losing its presence. He didn't look back. He didn't need validation. He didn't need apologies. Because what happened on that plane wasn't about proving who he was. It was about revealing who they were. And sometimes, the most powerful thing a person can do is stay calm long enough for the truth to expose itself. As he disappeared into the crowd, one thing remained certain. Everyone who had been on that flight arrived at the same destination. But not all of them landed as the same people they were when they boarded.